Every hunter meets a sharper moon. This is Whispering Narratives, where survival isn't promised and the dark always finds you. He hunted patterns. The moon rewrote them. The killer's ritual always began with silence. He slipped out from the alley, footsteps measured, breath caught in his throat like a blade waiting to drop. He had followed women for months, years, and always with the same precision. He timed the steps, mapped the shadows, and controlled the ending. In his mind, he was the predator, tonight. She was supposed to be another line in his private scripture of blood. The woman walked ahead, her coat pulled tight against the cold, head bowed beneath the sodium lamps that stretched her shadow thin across the pavement. He smiled in the dark, letting the thrill build. He had polished the knife that morning, its edge gleaming not just with steel but with something extra, a fine silver dust he had ground into the blade. Not that he believed in fairy tales, but it gave the weapon a shimmer he liked, a cruel sparkle. He did not know yet how prophetic that choice would be. She stopped at the corner. He expected fear, a glance over her shoulder, a quickened pace. Instead, she turned, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes were wrong, too bright, too sharp. They caught the moonlight and reflected it not in grey or blue, but in a low, molten gold that pinned him in place. For the first time in years, the predator faltered. "Don't make this hard," he hissed, stepping forward, knife low and ready. Her body answered, but not with retreat. The first sound was not words, not even a scream. It was a crack. Her shoulders lurched backward with a violent snap. Bone shifted under her skin, her spine bowing until it looked ready to pierce through flesh. Fingers splayed wide, nails carving crescent wounds into her palms as they lengthened, darkened, hooked into claws. Her jaw split with a sickening tear of skin, teeth surging forward into ivory blades. The killer froze, breath ragged. He had seen fear twist a face. He had seen death's rictus in countless victims. But this was not death. This was becoming. Her scream broke into a howl. The streetlight overhead buzzed and flickered as though the sound itself bent electricity. The howl clawed into his chest, prying at his ribs, making his own heartbeat stumble. He gripped his knife tighter, muttering to himself, "Control, control, control." But control was gone. The figure before him swelled larger, muscle tearing its way into new form. A wolf's shadow stretched across the wall, upright, terrible, unmistakable. Eyes that once belonged to prey now burned with the promise of blood. The killer's first instinct was to run, but something deeper inside him stirred, something black and obsessive. Fear twisted into fascination. His knife, tipped with silver, no longer felt like a trinket. It felt like destiny. "You're not prey," he whispered, lips curling into a grin as terror and thrill fused. "You're a challenge." She lunged, not to kill, not yet. Her claws raked the bricks of the alley wall instead, carving gouges into stone. The sound screeched through the night like a warning siren. Her breath steamed as she circled him, testing, measuring. For once, the predator had become the measured one. The killer raised his blade, heart hammering, and smiled into her glowing eyes. "If you're a beast," he said, voice breaking into laughter, "then I'll be the one who cages you." Her snarl answered with no words, only hunger. The howl that followed was not just a sound. It was a summons. Somewhere beyond the alley, other dogs barked, shutters slammed, lights snapped off. People felt it in their bones. Something had shifted. The night had chosen its new game. Predator against predator, hunter against hunted, killer against curse. And as blood dripped from the woman's torn lips, the first ritual was marked. The first howl has marked you. Subscribe now or face the night alone. He didn't sleep. Predators don't, not when something bigger has just looked through them like glass. He shut himself inside the apartment that never looked lived in. Bare mattress, a single chair, a table pitted with knife marks, and laid out everything he owned that could be turned into a question or an answer. The journal opened like a wound. He filled it. Sketches of the alley, measurements of claw gouges against a ruler, notes on the distance between streetlights, the precise time the howl began according to his watch, and the exact moment the bulb above him sputtered and died, as if the noise had reached through the lines and pinched the filament. On the next page, he wrote one word in block letters, moon. the quiet that followed. He listened for the building's small noises, pipes clunking, a neighbor's late TV, footsteps passing the hall. Nothing. The city had pulled the blanket over its head. Even fear sleeps eventually. Obsession doesn't. He tore open a shoebox, dumped trophies he hadn't looked at in years. A necklace, a key card, a hotel pen, a broken phone. Meaningless, all of it. Humans were puzzles he had solved too many times. But this was a lock he had never been given the key for, and he could feel the key somewhere in his hands, under his skin, maybe in his teeth. He wrote another word, silver. It was half superstition, half test. The knife he'd used, polished that morning with an arrogant sprinkle of powdered silver, had glinted like a promise in the alley. The beast had looked at it, not with fear, with recognition, like a wolf staring at a trap and memorizing its springs. He Googled old words he'd called fairy tales when he was young and cruel and bored. Lycanthrope, therianthropy, berserker myths, skinwalkers now and then, moon sickness, wolf's mark. He hated the forums and loved them at the same time. Cheap fonts, midnight claims, the way liars stumble over details that believers memorize. But in the flood of falsehood, patterns rose like bones under thin skin. Fire doesn't matter. Iron doesn't matter. Silver matters. The moon isn't a trigger so much as a permission. Some say curse. Some say inheritance. Some say justice. Justice. He tasted the word, then spat it into the trash along with a handful of Polaroids that suddenly felt small. He calibrated a metronome on his phone to the pace of her steps before the change. Clicked back and forth until it became a language. Prey pace, hunter pace. Then something else completely when the bones began to sing. He mapped the cadence in the margins and circled the place where the rhythm shattered. Every story has a tear you can pull on until the whole thing unravels. He bought a new blade, not a kitchen tool pretending to be a weapon. A real thing, handmade, the kind of steel that knows violence by first name. He took it to a jeweler whose hands didn't shake and said he needed silver work done along the edge, thin but true. The jeweler asked nothing. Everyone understands some purchases are a confession. He built a kit. Wire snare with a hair trigger. Heavy gauge chain modified with a cuff. He sanded smooth and then coated with a sliver of soldered silver. A bolt cutter for if everything went wrong. Duct tape, because duct tape is the flag of men who think they can fix the unfixable. He packed it all into a canvas roll and slid it into a backpack that had carried picnic lunches once. Before he learned that he enjoyed the quiet after a last breath more than conversation, he scouted. The slaughterhouse had been fenced off and left to rot at the edge of the river, a skeleton of girders and hooks and old ghosts. He cut the fence where the cameras had long since died. Inside, the corridors smelled like rust and rain. He liked the echo of the place, the way it threw a man's heartbeat back at him. In the central room, he tested the ceiling beams and found one that could take weight. He set an anchor. He measured the drop. He left and returned. The ritual of a man courting a cathedral. On the fourth visit, he scattered bait, strips of raw beef from a cheap supermarket, a torn jacket that smelled like his sweat, the burned match ends of a small fire, not for her nose, though he respected it, but for the dogs outside, the coyotes in the margins. Make the world smell like a place where hunting happens. No predator trusts a room that smells like nothing. He kept moving, nights into mornings, and the moon, smug and faithful, kept its appointments. He recorded the phases, drew the sickle's progress toward the round plate that remakes beasts out of people. He traced it like a lover would, the way he never traced a lover's spine. The first attempt came and went like a bad joke. He tracked her to the river trail, saw the shape of her between trees, a woman again, shoulders hunched, hair wet with fog. He dropped the snare. It snapped on air. She stopped, turned. The old hymn would have tried to close. The new hymn felt the way a winter pond feels right before the ice breaks. Held, fragile, 1 foot wrong from drowning. She didn't flee. She watched. The distance between them he measured not in feet but in stories, his ending, her beginning. Then she was gone. Back home, he wrote one more word, lower than the rest, almost shy. Rules. If she could change, there were rules. If there were rules, there was a cage hidden inside them, the way every sentence has a period if you're patient enough. He underlined the word until the paper thinned. Then he opened a new page and wrote what sounded like lies until they started feeling like mathematics. Silver burns, binds, or slows. The body breaks before the mind fully leaves. Patterns are a leash. Break them, break the beast, hunger decides. Offer another path. She chose not to kill me. Why, that last line circled him all night. It wasn't mercy, he knew. It was something harder. Maybe experimentation. Maybe she wanted him to become a better hunter, because only better hunters make better hunts. Maybe she remembered herself under the fur, enough to measure the rotted fence and think, not yet. The city sparked with life at dawn. He waited it out. At noon he slept sitting up with the knife across his knees, like a priest who clutches an old book at a funeral. When he woke, he pulled on a clean shirt and stared at the wall where he'd taped the Polaroid enlargements. The alley, the claw marks, the blur of her mid-turn, one frame where the eyes nearly resolved. He felt small. He felt alive. He felt like a man kneeling at the mouth of a cave where something bigger than him breathed in and out and waited. He smiled without joy. Tomorrow, he told the wall, we start teaching each other. Have you heard whispers like these before? Confess below and bind yourself to the tale. The slaughterhouse reeked of dust, rust, and forgotten prayers. Chains hung from the beams like nooses. Hooks swayed with a whisper that had no wind to move them. It was the cathedral he had chosen. The killer stood in its center, kit spread on a stained steel table. The silver-edged blade gleamed under his flashlight's cone. He had rehearsed every angle, every trigger, every snare. A metronome ticked from his phone, the cadence of steps he'd memorized, his own drumbeat for this hunt. But the rhythm faltered when she arrived. Not through the door, not along the path he expected. The sound began as a groan in the walls themselves, metal straining, brick cracking. Then came the thump of something heavy landing inside. The killer's smile twitched wide. She hadn't come like prey. She'd come like storm. Her silhouette stretched long beneath the broken windows, the moon burning at her back. She staggered once, knees buckling, arms folded as if she might collapse. For a heartbeat, she was a woman again, weak, breakable, and then the breaking began. Her spine arched, vertebrae snapping like gunshots. Fingers split their own skin as claws forced through, curling black and sharp. Ribs shifted, chest widening with each gasping breath until her blouse split down the middle, fabric curling away like petals from a rotting flower. Her jaw cracked, cheekbones bulging, lips shredding as the muzzle surged forward. Eyes blazed gold. Veins glowed faintly beneath her flesh, rivers of molten fire mapping themselves under the skin before it all tore loose into fur. She screamed, then howled. The sound was both. The hooks rattled. The beams trembled. Dust fell from the rafters like ash. The killer's heart slammed against his ribs. But he didn't run. He stepped forward, raising the knife like a priest raises a relic. "Beautiful," he whispered, not to her but to the breaking. The wolf straightened, chest heaving, fur bristling under the moonlight like armor. She towered now, head brushing the low beams. Her breath steamed, lips curled back from teeth that dripped anticipation. The first clash was faster than thought. She lunged, he rolled, snare snapping tight around her ankle. She roared, the sound thick enough to choke the air, and the chain bit deep, glowing faintly where the soldered silver touched fur. For a moment, he thought he had her. She tore the beam in half. The ceiling groaned, wood shrieking as her strength ripped the anchor free. She dragged the chain like a toy, swinging it against the floor, sparks jumping from concrete. The killer laughed, manic and breathless, as though he had been waiting for this failure. "Yes, show me what cages you can break." She slashed. Claws carved a gouge through the steel table where his kit had been seconds earlier. Shards of metal clanged across the floor. He ducked, rolled, came up slashing. The silver edge kissed her arm. She snarled, jerking back, the first true flinch he'd seen. Blood hit the floor in drops that hissed like acid. A gaze locked on him. Not prey, not nuisance, enemy. The killer's grin split wider, teeth bared. "That's right. You feel it. You bleed. You're not untouchable." The wolf moved again, faster. Claw and fang shredded the air around him. He dodged once, twice, but the third strike clipped him, tearing across his chest. He hit the floor hard, lungs burning, knife clattering away. She loomed over him, breath hot, dripping onto his face. Her teeth opened wider, wider, until the world became nothing but darkness and hunger. He reached, not for the knife, but for his phone. The metronome ticked on. Tick, tick, tick. He shoved it forward like a talisman. For one heartbeat she stopped. The rhythm in her ears matched the rhythm in her blood. Her head cocked. The chain at her ankle rattled. The killer, half laughing, half bleeding, whispered, "Even beasts follow rules." The pause broke. She snapped the phone in her jaws and hurled it aside. Then came the weight of her body slamming him against the tiles, claws raking the ground around his skull. The chain sang as it dragged. The hooks overhead screamed as they swung. The slaughterhouse had become what he wanted it to be, a stage, predator against predator. Blood for blood, and the body, hers, his, everyone's, was always going to break. If this body's betrayal shook you, subscribe before yours tears apart. Mark survival with a sigil of protection, hit-like. The slaughterhouse breathed like a lung. Every echo was a heartbeat, every rattle of chain a reminder that neither of them was in control for long. The killer staggered to his feet, blood soaking his shirt. His knife was gone, somewhere in the shadows where claws had hurled it. His chest burned, torn open by her first swipe. Every instinct screamed retreat, but he wasn't built for retreat. He darted into the maze of corridors, breath ragged, footsteps measured. His mind flickered between pain and calculation. He had prepared this place like a puzzle box, doors jammed, snares hidden, sight lines chosen. She was faster, stronger, older in ways he couldn't fathom. But intelligence was his gift. He would drag her through his design until she bled for it. Behind him, the howl came. It rolled through concrete and steel, making the walls tremble. Dogs in the distance answered, their voices breaking in fear before silence reclaimed them. The howl wasn't just a sound. It was ownership. The killer ducked behind a hanging curtain of plastic sheets, flashlight beam flicking. He crouched low, hands groping for the first snare wire he'd set earlier. His fingers closed around it, still intact. Good. He baited it with his own blood, smearing a crimson streak along the floor. Then he slipped away, vanishing deeper. The wolf followed. She moved through the corridors with a gait that was both human and not, upright but hunched, claws dragging sparks along concrete. Her nose twitched at the scent, the copper tang of fresh blood painting her path forward. She pushed through the plastic curtain. The wire whipped around her chest. The snare tightened. She roared, the sound cracking overhead glass. The silver thread in the wire hissed where it touched fur, searing. For a heartbeat, the killer smiled from his hiding place. Got you, then she flexed, muscle tore steel. The wire snapped apart like string. She ripped the curtain down with her claws, plastic sheets fluttering like torn wings. The silver left burns along her ribs, smoke curling faintly, but her stride never faltered. If anything, the pain sharpened her focus. The killer ran again, deeper, forcing her into the bowels of the slaughterhouse. He darted past rusted hooks, through pools of stagnant water. He knew the path. She didn't. That was his edge. At the central pit, the old kill floor, he sprang his second trap. A cage rigged from rebar and chain swung down from the rafters, slamming around her with a shower of sparks. The door clanged shut, lock snapping into place. For the first time, silence. The killer limped closer, breathing hard, chest heaving. His eyes shone with triumph. "Even gods bleed," he whispered, lifting a silver-laced crowbar from his pack. He slammed it against the cage bars, a thunderous clang that made the wolf's ears flatten. "And even beasts," he grinned, blood dripping down his chin, "can be caged." But her eyes burned hotter, brighter. The cage rattled as she slammed into it once, twice, 3 times. Metal groaned, bolts squealed. The killer raised his crowbar again, ready to strike her skull through the bars. She stopped. Not from weakness, no, from choice. Her eyes met his. For a moment he saw the woman behind them, broken lips moving, forming words through the muzzle's distortion. "Run." The cage exploded. The bars twisted outward as if the moon itself had reached down and bent them. The killer was hurled backward, crowbar skidding across the tiles. He slammed against the wall, gasping, ribs threatening to crack. She emerged, not as prey, not even as beast, but as something between. A hybrid shadow, fur patchy where silver burned her, breath snarling, voice half-human still. The killer's laugh turned into a cough. He crawled desperate toward the crowbar. She stalked behind, claws clicking against steel. The slaughterhouse had become a mirror of them both, each trap undone, each escape rewriting the rules. Hunter, hunted, predator, prey. Every word flipped back and forth like the echo of the metronome. At the exit door, he stumbled upright, crowbar in hand, blood dripping. He shoved it forward, silver tip glinting. "If I run," he gasped, "I don't survive. But if I fight," her howl cut him off. A full-throated roar that burst the last glass in the rafters, raining shards like frozen stars around them. She lunged. He swung. Steel met claw. The impact rang like a church bell announcing a funeral. Where would you run if the claws found your door? Tell me. Your answer may decide if you survive. The killer's walls looked less like an apartment now, and more like scripture written in string and blood. Polaroids, red thread, lunar cycles, headlines scissored from old newspapers. He was building a cathedral to the hunt, but even cathedrals crack when whispers seep in. As he scribbled notes, silver burns, moon triggers, voice survives. A sound slid through the silence, not the hum of pipes, not the creak of neighbors. A whisper, faint, feminine, almost mocking. "Run." He froze, pen dripping ink across the page. His own wounds throbbed. He pressed the claw mark on his chest, half expecting it to split open again. Then silence returned, but the damage was done. That night he dragged himself back to his den, not to rest, to record. The journal lay open, page after page, blooming with scrawls. His handwriting was jagged, fevered. He wasn't just a murderer now. He was a chronicler of a predator older than his craft. Every detail mattered. The sound of her ribs splitting like trees in a storm. The way silver smoked against her skin but didn't cripple her. The pause at the metronome's tick. The half-word spoken through a muzzle. He taped Polaroids to the walls, blurry frames caught from his hidden trail cameras. The woman before, the wolf after. A single image mid-change, a face torn between screams and snarls, eyes wide with something that looked too human to be beast. Too beast to be human. Beside it he scribbled, "Between." He flipped to a new page and wrote a title at the top, "Archive of the Howl." His note silver burns, weakens, slows, but does not stop. Must be direct contact. Moon. Trigger, not source. Her will was still inside the form. Voice. Retained fragments of self. If speech survives, then choice survives. Cage. Steel breaks. Rebar bends. Only ritual strength matters. Blood drips hissed on floor. Possible contagion. Possible mark. He circled that last line until the paper nearly tore. If the blood itself carried curse, then every drop on his skin was a gamble. He pressed his finger to the half-healed claw mark across his chest. Did infection work backward, forward? He didn't know, yet. The wolf, meanwhile, limped through the city's abandoned alleys. Her burns smoldered. Each breath was fire and memory. She remembered the cage, the silver, the man's laugh when he thought he had her. But more haunting was the look in his eyes when he didn't strike. For the first time, she wondered if the curse had found its mirror. Another predator who wasn't afraid to bleed for knowledge. She leaned against a wall, sliding down into the filth, human shape folding back into place. Bones cracked in reverse, fur retracting, claws withdrawing like knives sheathed against their will. She gasped when her own voice returned fully. "Why?" she whispered to herself. "Why let him live? Why give him a chance to build his cages?" The answer echoed in her blood, because the hunt was not finished. The curse demanded continuance, demanded the story be told until one predator ended the other. Back in his apartment, he mapped patterns. He layered lunar cycles against dates of disappearances in old newspapers. He traced red thread across his wall from 1965 through 2025. Stories of beast attacks, feral killers, wild dog rampages, always under the moon, always with wounds that no animal should leave. He underlined one headline from 1983, "Butcher slain by beast in slaughterhouse." He laughed aloud at the symmetry. "History doesn't repeat," he muttered, "it devours." The archive grew with each pin and string. His killings had always been about control, about artistry. But this was bigger. He wasn't chronicling crimes anymore. He was writing scripture. The scripture of predator versus predator. By dawn, his walls were an altar. Strings webbed across maps and Polaroids. Circles of moon phases ringed the edges. Symbols he didn't understand slipped in, copied from folklore sites and half-burnt books he dug up from pawn shops. Glyphs of wolves, sigils of teeth, marks of binding. He didn't know their meanings, but they felt right. He scrawled one final note before passing out in his chair. The wolf is not my prey. She is my rival, and rivals must be remembered. The city woke. Somewhere in the outskirts, a woman with bloodied clothes and haunted eyes cleaned herself in a cracked mirror. She traced the burns along her ribs and whispered her own archive, a vow that this man would not live to pass his notes on. 2 predators, 2 archivists of blood, one story that the moon would not let end. Curses echo, but only the archive endures. Subscribe and add your name before the howl returns. The river mist crept back into the slaughterhouse, curling through broken windows, filling the pit where blood had dried decades ago. He returned limping, ribs bound with tape, crowbar strapped to his back, silver knife newly sharpened and kissed with fire until it glowed. His journal had commanded it. The end must happen where the story began. She returned limping too, burns still angry across her ribs, fur patchy where silver had kissed too deep. Her eyes carried exhaustion, but behind it something darker. Resolve. The slaughterhouse waited for them both, the killer's prayer. He entered first, whispering into the silence. We are more alike than you know. His words weren't bravado anymore. They were confession. Every step echoed a vow. He had killed many, but none had looked at him the way she had. None had forced him to catalogue, to archive, to remember. He set his traps again. Snare lines, wire nets, improvised spikes. But deep down he knew she would break them. They weren't meant to hold. They were meant to pace the dance. The moonlight split through the rafters. He turned his face up into it, grinning through split lips. Come on then. The wolf's arrival, she came in silence, padding through shadow. Her shape half hidden, half shifting, as the curse tugged her between forms. She wasn't fully wolf, wasn't fully woman. She was something sharpened by pain, by choice, by the necessity of finishing what had begun. Her claws clicked once against steel. His head snapped toward the sound, and then it began. The clash. She lunged through the first wire snare. It bit her arm, silver thread smoking, but she tore it free before it could hold. He swung the crowbar, silver edge catching her shoulder, the crack of impact echoing through the pit. She staggered, then countered, claws carving through the wall beside his head as he ducked. The slaughterhouse roared with their violence. Hooks swayed, chains rattled. The old bones of the place shuddered as if welcoming the carnage it had once known. She slammed him into the floor. He gasped, ribs breaking anew. He drove the silver knife upward, plunging it between fur and flesh. She shrieked, a sound that shattered glass overhead. Blood sprayed, hot and luminous under moonlight, but she didn't fall. Her muzzle descended, teeth snapping inches from his throat. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with awe. So this is it, he whispered, voice breaking. The perfect kill. The breakpoint. Instead of finishing him, she hesitated. A flicker of humanity lingered in her burning gaze. Her hand, not paw, not claw, but hand, pressed against the knife in her side, pushing it deeper herself. Blood spilled over his chest. She wanted him to see, even silver wouldn't cage her forever. The killer, coughing blood, laughed. It was a wet, gurgling sound, but triumphant. Yes, yes, break yourself. Become what you're meant to be, she roared, pulling the knife free, tossing it aside like trash. Her wound smoked, but still she stood. She grabbed him by the collar, lifted him, slammed him against the hanging hooks. The chains groaned, threatening to split under the weight. For a moment, Predator looked Predator in the eyes, closer than ever before. You hunted patterns, she growled, voice distorted, half-human. But this hunt has no ending. The crescendo, the slaughterhouse lights flickered alive all at once, a ghost of electricity, triggered by some dying circuit. For an instant, the place glowed white-hot, revealing the horror in full. Her fur matted with blood, his chest torn, both dripping, both unbroken. They clashed again. Claws against crowbar, fang against fist. The sound was thunder in metal, lightning in blood. She hurled him through a wall of hooks. They crashed down, a metallic avalanche burying him. He clawed his way out, laughing even as blood streamed from his head. "Perfect," he muttered. "You've made me prey. I've never been prey before." The wolf's howl tore the roof open. Rafters groaning, dust raining down. The stalemate. When the moon sank behind clouds. Silence fell heavy. He lay bleeding in the pit, knife lost, crowbar bent. She stood above him, chest heaving, muzzle dripping crimson. She could finish it. One strike, one bite, and the rivalry would end. But she turned instead, limped back toward the shadows, leaving him alive again. He laughed through broken ribs, coughing blood onto the tiles. "Run then, but this story is mine to write." Her silhouette vanished. His laugh echoed, and the slaughterhouse kept its secrets. The curse doesn't end here. Follow the howl. The next body falls on screen now. The slaughterhouse was quiet again. Chains swayed in the rafters, their echoes fading into silence. The floor was painted in blood, not just hers, not just his, but something shared, mingled, indistinguishable. Rivalry had become ritual. The killer dragged himself upright against a pillar, coughing red into his hand. Every rib screamed, every breath rattled, but the fire in his eyes burned unextinguished. He touched the torn claw marks across his chest and smiled faintly. Delirious, reverent. "She didn't kill me," he muttered to no one but the shadows. "She marked me." He pulled his ruined journal close, pages torn, edges soaked in blood. With fingers stiff and trembling, he wrote in smeared ink, marked by the howl, "Survivor. Rival. Archive continues." His laugh was soft, cracked. Not triumphant this time, not manic, but almost prayerful. The kind of laugh a man makes when he realizes the story has chosen him, whether he deserves it or not. The wolves rode outside. The wolf limped into the mist. Her breath plumed like smoke, her burns raw and screaming. She staggered, collapsed against the riverbank, and let the night peel her apart again. Bones contracted, fur sloughed away, skin split, and reknit itself in spasms of agony until the woman returned, naked, shivering, half-human again. She stared at her hands. They shook with exhaustion, but she clenched them into fists. For all her strength, for all her hunger, she had not finished him, and she hated herself for it. But she also knew something deeper, that the curse had whispered into her blood to wait. Not every hunt ends in death. Some hunts are meant to fester, to grow, to spread like rot until they touch everything, and he, that man, that killer, was already infected. The city sleeps uneasy. The city's people stirred without knowing why. They felt the echoes of the slaughterhouse, sensed the howl that had ruptured the night. Parents pulled children closer in their beds. Dogs whimpered at unseen shapes beyond the windows. Streetlights flickered in patterns that felt wrong, like messages from a language older than electricity. The archive wasn't just in his journal anymore. It was in every sound that night had carried. Every whisper the moon had scrawled across rooftops, their legacy. The killer staggered home by dawn, a broken silhouette against the skyline. His journal under one arm, his crowbar bent like a relic. Every step left a smear of blood on the pavement. People who saw him didn't stop him. They lowered their eyes, because something in him looked more beast than man now. The woman vanished into the underworld of the city. Abandoned warehouses, river fog, forgotten lots where the moonlight lingered longest. She was rumor again, whisper again, waiting for the next night. The next hunt. Two predators now bound by something larger than themselves. Not prey and hunter, but mirror and mirror. Curse and obsession, feeding each other in a spiral the city would never escape. The whispered future weeks later, new notes appeared in his archive. Different handwriting, jagged, desperate. The wolf is not alone. Photographs blurred with more than one shape caught in motion. Howls overlapping in the night. The killer's grin was wild, cracked lips bleeding as he pinned them to his wall, and somewhere in the mist, the wolf raised her head and howled back. Not alone, not anymore. The pack was coming. The pack grows stronger with every whisper. Join the pack, subscribe and spread the curse before it finds you. At Whispering Narratives, we don't just tell stories. We open doors to the shadows. And sometimes, those shadows reach back, If you're still here after this one, subscribe before the next full moon and share this if you still believe in mercy.